Socialize the losses. The Fed, as you may or may not know, is not a public institution, it's a private institution. Its shareholders, which means who owns it, there's a list of them. It includes the Rothschild banks, the J.P. Morgan descendant, Goldman Sachs, etc. I mean, you can look it up. And as a private owned entity, it has a strong profit motive, and as you may or may not be surprised, it has mechanisms to privatize the gains and socialize the losses. So in terms of the socialized part, the taxpayer's on the hook for its losses. That's why, for example, Steve Mnuchin was quoted as saying that the Treasury is perfectly willing and expects, or I don't know if he said expects, but is okay with the coronavirus programs, like the CARES programs, losing money, losing capital, and by extension, the taxpayers being on the hook for that. The programs that are administered by the Fed. So the Fed administers the programs and they lose money, and the taxpayer is responsible for them. Whereas the profits are privatized because it's very murky, but if you study it, the Fed is, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe from what I've read that the Fed is not legally required to share all its profits with the Treasury, and it proactively in 1947 agreed to share, I believe, some profits, but it pays out dividends, it has a surplus fund, and so the profits are privatized, but the losses are socialized. So if you thought the bailout of the banks was bad, I mean, the Fed is basically the ultimate bank that holds the reserves on the other banks. So it's not just the Treasury that's doing, bailouts and making it too big to fail. It's also the Fed. The Fed and the Treasury obviously work closely together, even though one is public and one is private. I guess that's the ultimate private-public partnership, you could say or think of it that way. But, I mean, I'm not an expert on what is the degree of the independence between the Fed and the Treasury. I'm not sure exactly how those dynamics work, so I don't want to get into that part of it. But the arrangement as it works now is that the Treasury, in practical terms, is subsidizing the losses of the Feds, and the Treasury is us. We are the Treasury, the U.S. government Treasury, like you pay your taxes to the Treasury. So if the Treasury is, and Mnuchin said that the Treasury is okay with losing money on these Fed programs. And when we lose money, that the money that we've lost is our money. So obviously there's going to be protests, when things get really, really bad, as they have, and if they get worse, because the Fed is also moving out further on the risk curve. So at the beginning, all they bought was treasuries, which are very safe. And then they bought mortgage-backed securities, which are probably a little bit less safe, obviously, because if the housing market goes down, or somewhat less safe, because that, the housing bubble of 2008 caused tremendous devastation, and that theoretically could happen again. And now they're moving further out on the risk curve by going into corporate debt. And the crazy thing, it depends how you define crazy, but the debt that they're buying, not only is it further out on the yield curve, on the risk curve. I mean, it does have a higher yield, but it's further out on the risk curve. But the companies that are buying corporate debt are not even American companies, some of them. If what I'm reading is accurate, I believe it included Toyota, Daimler. And Daimler, not only is it a German company, but the shareholders, some of them are Chinese and also Kuwaiti from reports. So in a sense, the if you really want to think of it this way, the American taxpayers are bailing out the Chinese if these corporate debts go bad, because the Fed's losses, as Minutia has already said, Minutia said related to the coronavirus program. So to be fair, I don't know if Minutia meant that all the Fed's losses or only the Fed's losses related to these specific programs. So I don't want to overgeneralize, overextend, but so I can't 100% say that these would be subsidizing the Chinese, because I don't know if Minutia meant all of the programs, only some of them. But the larger point is that the Fed is playing, if you want to think of it this way, kind of fast and loose with our money, and they're taking the profits, the private owners, to a certain extent. I mean, some money still goes to the Fed, I believe, and we're on the hook to a certain degree for their losses. Maybe 100%, maybe less, I'm not really sure. And it's kind of crazy. So obviously there's protests when things get really bad, and the government could use the protests as an excuse, if they want, to do more surveillance, to clamp down. So this just has a lot of repercussions in a lot of areas.